Think that quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards? How about that receiver in Miami grabbing a touchdown? Check out DraftKings Pick 6, the newest way to compete against others and play fantasy football to win cash with DraftKings. Pick a player and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like yards, touchdowns, catches, and more. Get your picks right, and you'll win cash. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code BALLERS. That's code BALLERS for new customers to play $5 and get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed, plus 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Offer expires 9/19, only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. 1 per new customer. Reward issued as $50 in non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 6 months. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at NFL.com/terms.
The DFS Studio is brought to you by DraftKings. Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in. It's showdown time here on the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined, as always, by Matthew. He's ready to get hurt on a Thursday night bets.
Dude, this just feels right. I mean, we're back, baby. Yeah, we got Thursday Night Showdown coming up. Ravens-Chiefs is going to be such a fun game to watch. And then, let's not waste any time. Let's just go right into Friday night. Little Eagles-Packers in Brazil. Saturday, maybe we see the kids a couple hours here. There, maybe we say hi to our wives. And before you know it, it's Sunday main slate, baby. We are so back. I cannot wait for this week. It's going to be great. And then Jets and Niners on Monday night. So what a weekend of football we have coming up. But first, Kyle, I mean, shout out to the new intro. Like, this is the DraftKings Studio, baby. We're back.
Two dads at home, making sure their kids are okay and alive. But just in the studio. We're workshopping in the studio. And this is our first Tuesday show of the season. So this officially means that you and I are back after a Labor Day weekend. So what'd you get to do this past weekend?
I live a glamorous lifestyle, Kyle, with 3 kids under 3. I mean,
glitzy.
Yeah, we're going out all the time, hitting the best clubs, the best restaurants. No, in all seriousness, I was texting you this morning. I was like, you know what? Like, I took Labor Day off. I didn't really do a ton of work. I did some prep for this show, and I did a little bit of, stuff to get some articles ready for the DFS pass. But I really tried to just step away from Monday. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start early tomorrow. I'm going to wake up early and I'm going to go for it. 4 a.m., the new baby has a massive blowout. So I was awake from about 4 to 5, and any dads or moms out there understand what that's like. So I did not get an early start today. So now I feel very behind. But no, man, it was really low key. Just kind of hung with the girls, stayed at home, saw the family a little bit. But otherwise, just kind of kept it pretty low key.
I know that blowout lifestyle.
Oh, man.
From personally, I've been there, with my kids. But yeah,
I thought you were saying you personally have experienced that, as in
I'm not going to
you were the one with the blowout.
I'm not going to deny it. We've all had issues in our lives, but yeah, it was a good weekend. I had we celebrated my dad's birthday. Megala Bowl drafted, so my team's. I'm pretty excited about my team. Put it that way. I got to draft with my son for the Megala Bowl, and then my wife and I are flying out on Wednesday, so we've been a lot of prepping to go to Arizona. It's a wild week to get everything together, and on this show, we're going to give you everything you need for Baltimore at Kansas City. We're going to laser focus on that. A lot of times on the Tuesday show, we're giving a preview of the upcoming week in the main slate, and Betz gets to write an article for Thursday night preview. We're going to take everything we do and just fit it into one show. So you're going to get A lot of stuff to think about. We're going to talk about Showdown strategy, but I think I really want to give people practicals of how this Showdown, how this game is different than what we've had in the past. Like, I'm looking at the salaries, and we're going to build out a lineup and talk about all this stuff. But man, is DraftKings just like being really nice? Because I get Patrick Mahomes for as cheap as we're ever going to get him in a Showdown.
Pat Mahomes is cheap. Xavier Worthy is cheap. Rasheed Rice is way too cheap. Mark Andrews is like the same price.
Mark Andrews is so cheap.
He's like the same price as Carson Wentz, which, if you're not familiar with how Showdown pricing works, generally they put the backup quarterbacks like around $6K so that if there's an injury to the starter, it's not just like, oh, that dude was $1,000, he's free. But he's basically the same price as Carson Wentz. So it's just so funny. Yeah, the pricing is so loose, and I do think that adds an interesting element to the strategy of this Showdown slate where, you know, it's so easy to fit Rasheed Rice and Mark Andrews and both quarterbacks, and you can feel pretty comfy with your lineup. So I think it's going to create a situation where everyone just tries to fill in that middle tier, which, don't get me wrong, they're awesome plays. Like, we'll talk about all these guys, and they're incredible plays. But, like, I think when I just looked at the pricing, I was like, ooh, Derrick Henry is going to get squeezed. Like, it's hard to fit him, right? Same thing with Zay Flowers. Like, he's hard to justify for $1,600 more than Mark Andrews. So there's a lot of game theory and kind of strategy around it, but the pricing is wild and is very, very loose. So you can pretty much do whatever you want on this slate.
There's also a lot of cheapies that are priced in there and yet will not be playing in this game. Kadarius Toney is not on this roster. Samaje Perine, you're going to look for him. Not available for us to play.
He is. He was added actually this morning. I don't know if you saw that.
Okay, well then I'm glad you were able to say that because I was looking around last night.
Yeah, he was just added.
Just a lot of cheap. Jared Wiley, I've seen some people talk to me about that. The Chiefs rookie tight end for $200 is as another tempting player if you want to go there. So we'll go through all those different strategies, different points. Man, I'm excited to just talk about real football. I even got some hand in the dirt takes. I warned you ahead of time.
You did.
We're gonna be talking a little cover 2, talking about single high safety looks and how Lamar attacks that. Does it get any better?
I mean, that's what we live for, baby.
I feel like I need a drop this year for this podcast where I get to give my football takes. Just pure football. Now we're not even talking DFS. We're not even talking theory. And it's exciting.
I feel like at some point you're going to have on your Twitter at Kyle_Borg, there's going to be at some point in the next year, I feel like you with like a whiteboard, just coaching people up on the X's and the O's. I mean, that's what you were made to do.
That is kind of the next evolution of my life in football is to, because I have a teaching background. I like that. I like being able to look at how defenses are attacking offenses. We usually go the other way around, right? Like, here's the offense. Okay, defense, we don't really care for fantasy purposes, but it's like, no, like, how do the Ravens, and we'll talk about it. Last year in the AFC Championship game, they didn't really know how to respond, and the game turned into a dud for fantasy purposes. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But if you want to get all of our picks, dfspass.com. I would encourage you. We tell people, it's like, you could wait and keep waiting to get the DFS pass, or you could just win your money in 1 week, and it pays for itself when it comes to cash strategy and our picks. You can get all of those dfspass.com, including our picks for DraftKings, FanDuel, the Optimizer, which is new and improved this year. It is updated with some of our core plays, so I'm excited for that. On Friday's episode, we will talk all things main slate. So if you're one of those people preparing, we want you to go overboard on Thursday. That's what this episode is, Thursday Night Showdown. And then Friday's episode will be us previewing the main slate and kind of doing a blitzkrieg version of it. So that should be good. But dfspass.com if you want to be a part of that. But let's just jump right in.
Thursday Night Breakdown.
It's the only time all year I get to use that drop bets because it's a main show kind of thing. It's a great one. It's a great one for you to realize, like, okay, we're turning the page towards this week. We're looking at Thursday night, and let's talk about some game theory. And then you and I are just going to look at the salaries, who could be optimal as a captain, break down the game. But in general, we have articles, we have former podcasts on this strategy, but we wanted to quickly just remind you that we're looking at one game. And so there's about 1,000 different scenarios that you could look at in this game, and things could change. But when it comes to optimizing your lineup, realize that in one game, players affect other players. For example, Lamar is priced the highest, and we have him projected right now in the optimizer for 21.9 DraftKings points, which is, his median outcome. If he's your captain, and on DraftKings, that's a 1.5 multiplier, that would be almost 33 points. That would be awesome. Let's say Lamar hits that. He hits 33 points, 35 points, somewhere around there. You're like, sweet, Lamar is a great player. But at his price point, you have to ask yourself the question, does he pay off? And also, if this is a game where Lamar does hit, let's say 35 points, you can bet that Mahomes is going to be pushed up as well. So it's kind of this back and forth of game theory where you can't just in a vacuum say this player's good, I like this player. It affects each other. And so I think that's the part that we want to figure out in this game, that you're looking at players and how they work within a game. And I don't know, I tend to not look at roster percentages too much in showdown stuff. I can see which players are going to be super popular, but I tend to just mostly look at, okay, game flows and going from there.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest weakness I see with a lot of people that either send us lineups or just ask questions about Showdown, or if you're new to the format, is, oftentimes if you just click run through the optimizer, it's probably not going to give you what you want. And the reason for that is this is less about just true projection, not that it doesn't matter, because those things do matter, but more just your lineup needs to tell a story. It needs to have an if this, then that scenario. So like the example you were mentioning, where it's like, hey, if Lamar is the optimal captain, we can assume he had a pretty good day running, 60 rushing yards or something, maybe rushing score, and he throws for at least one touchdown, maybe two. And it's like, well, okay, in that scenario, there's a pretty good chance, especially where they're priced, that Derrick Henry isn't in the optimal. So I would do a negative doc on those two if I'm running an optimizer, or just not play Derrick Henry in a Captain Lamar, situation. Now, caveat of anything weird can happen in a one-game slate. So, in theory, he could throw a touchdown pass to Derrick Henry, but the odds of that are so low. So you just want to be thinking about, how that affects other players on the same team, but also, like you said, what does that do for the other side of the ball? Meaning, if Lamar is pushed and he has to throw more than we think, maybe the Chiefs got up to a big lead and Pacheco is the reason why. So you kind of build these, stories and narratives in your head of how these guys fit and work together, not only on their same team, but also on the opponent. And I think, like I said, that's just the biggest weakness I see is a lot of times showdown lineups don't tell a story. You just have to make sure that you are building for certain game scripts in certain scenarios where, one player benefits, the other guy might suffer.
Yeah, I was looking at the splits, and we'll talk about them later, but with Derrick Henry, he's always been a player that's been extreme in wins and in losses. And then same thing with Lamar. I looked at all of his road splits in games that he lost. What did he do as a runner? We'll talk about some of those, and then you can kind of build it out from there. But remember, we're playing one game, and there's more volatility and variance than we think in this sport. In general, NFL is crazy week to week. We forget that any team can win. It really is possible. We're not just talking about covering your spread. And in this game, it's only a 3-point difference. You could see either of these teams win. Last year, don't forget, in week 1, the Lions played the Chiefs. They eked out a win. And then, I don't know if you remember, in week 2, those Lions lost at home to Seattle. The game had a 47 total, but the game was 37-31. That game hit the over. And then the Chiefs won the next week against the Jaguars, but it was a dud game where they won 17-9. We thought we wanted to stack that game. It had a great total, and it didn't. So it's you kind of got to see from week 1 to week 2 that chaos happens. So what would you just say is just the most likely outcome from the spreads and the totals of this game, of just saying, okay, I think this is what the public thinks is going to happen. And we're not saying we're going to fade it. It's just, this is the general sentiment of this game.
Yeah, I think when you look at these two teams, like you said, 46.5 points is kind of no man's land, right? It's not it's oh, baby, you got 51.5, this should be high flying. But it's also not, a slug where it's 40.5 total, and you're okay, probably a lot of, gross play volume, a lot of rush attempts. So it's kind of right in the middle. I was actually looking before we started recording at what people are doing over on DraftKings based off these lines. The money line is 46-54% right now as far as wagers go in favor of the Chiefs. 56% of folks are on the Ravens +3. So again, it's kind of split right down the middle. And then 51% on the over, 49% on the under. So in general, I think there's a lot of different directions this game could go. And I think the public as far as betting trends are telling you that. For me, the way I'm leaning into this game is I want to be high on both offenses, specifically the passing attack. With Mahomes, we for years, we just knew they're going to throw. They're explosive. They got Tyreek, Kelsey, everything's great. Mahomes is going to set the world on fire. And then, down the stretch, they still threw, but it was all dink and dunk. They didn't have explosive plays. We talked all offseason. What do? They go get Hollywood Brown. They draft Xavier Worthy. Rashee Rice is not suspended anymore. So, all of this is setting up for them to continue to throw at the highest rate in football, in my opinion. And then you look at the Ravens defense. Last year, dude, they were historic on an EPA per play basis, on a DVOA basis. So if they regress a little bit, and they just lost their defensive coordinator, and that explosive play from Mahomes comes, I think we're going to see a really good offensive performance from the Chiefs. Andy Reid and Mahomes have crushed in week 1 in their career. Anytime Andy Reid has time to prepare, he puts it on. And then the Ravens side of things, last year, the narrative was the Chiefs defense is so good. They're so good. And they were, but they just lost to Darius Sneed. Could they regress a little bit? I think so. And the Ravens quietly were not the run-heavy team you think they were. On the season, they were, because if you look at their total, first and second half splits combined, they were just winning every single game in the second half. Credit to Rich Rebar of Sharp Football for this stat. The Ravens were only trailing for 85 plays in the second half all year. That is insane. So in the first half of games, they were top 10 neutral pass rate, which, if you recall our conversations last offseason, it was okay, Todd Monken is here. Lamar's going to throw. This is going to be super fun for fantasy. And it kind of was and then wasn't, just because their defense was so historic. So my long-winded way of saying, I'm high on both passing offenses, and I actually kind of like the over in this spot. So that's how I'm viewing this game. But, we need to also recognize, the AFC Championship game just took place not that long ago, and that was a complete slugfest, right? So I think both options are on the table, but I'll be leaning into the passing attacks.
Yeah, I look at the way that these defenses showed out last year, and there is room for regression in a lot of different ways. The Chiefs quietly were actually kind of bad against opposing running backs. They were 28th in EPA per rush, and yet they stifled a lot of teams from sustaining drives, but when they did get in close, they did give it up. So there is a Derrick Henry route in this game. I think he's so priced up that it's hard for me to get on board when he's a dog on the road against this defense in general. So there's just a lot of different ways, but I agree. I want to lean into the offenses. I want to lean into the fact that I think the defenses have lost a bunch of players, Baltimore as well. And so what we usually do in Showdown is we figure out some type of story, a narrative, and we run with it. And then we kind of see, if this happens, how do I adjust my lineup? So for instance, if Mahomes is the optimal captain, and spoiler alert, he's the optimal flex in this game. I can't imagine not playing Patrick Mahomes unless you wanted to go to the dark side and say he gets hurt. If he's the optimal captain, then he's probably bringing multiple pass catchers with him. Or if he's the optimal flex, you're going to probably put maybe one of those Chiefs players in the flex or in the captain spot, Kelsey, Rashee Rice, Worthy, whoever. On the other side, if Derrick Henry has a Derrick Henry game, he goes over 100, we know he can, they win the game or at least keep it close, then the Baltimore passing attack might be affected. And we looked at correlations I looked at since 2011. So got a lot of data to work with here. If there's a total between 46 and 50 points like we have here, and there's a spread within 4, then if the RB1 goes off, the tight ends on his own team generally suffer on that. And this is a team that does sport 2 tight ends. We're going to be talking about Isaiah Likely because I think he's going to be on the field more and more valuable roles than Aguilar, or I don't know how you feel about Bateman. I never know how you feel about Bateman.
Yeah.
Not good?
I'm just one of those people that after 3 or 4 years, enough is enough kind of thing. That said, he's definitely the wide receiver too in this game. And my fade on him in best ball is more about across the entire season, not for this game. That said, his price is also, we talked about how Mark Andrews' price is egregious. Bateman's price relative to his teammates is also egregious for how little he's done, not being able to get on the field over Aguilar and the ghost of Odell Beckham last year. So he's almost the price is so bad it's kind of good in tournaments kind of thing. Nobody's going to want to play him, right? So if you're playing a Lamar captain, maybe you throw a Bateman in there. But I think that correlation stuff that you just mentioned there makes a lot of sense as far as how we build that way.
you also have to think about opposing players. Like if Lamar goes off, I mentioned earlier, then Mahomes is a really good play. But like if you take a quarterback, then how does that affect the opposing wide receiver one? So let's just say Mahomes goes off. The opposing wide receiver one's correlation is really, really good. And the opposing wide receiver two. So you get to think about that. But in this game, we do have a unique situation. Who is the wide receiver one for this team? Is it Zay Flowers or Mark Andrews? Is it Rashee Rice or is it Travis Kelce? Like you can make the argument for any of those guys being the quote wide receiver one. In the same way, if the RB1 goes off, the opposing RB2 is generally not that valuable. So for instance, Derrick Henry, it doesn't bode well for Samaje Perine, or if Pacheco goes off, it doesn't bode well for Justice Hill. But it's interesting also because Derrick Henry has a very distinct role where we know he doesn't get a lot of passing downs work. I gave the stat. He has 2 third down receptions over the last 5 years combined. Like it's just not something that he's been doing. And last year, Justice Hill got a ton of work inside the red zone. So when we think about correlation, we're thinking about how does it affect their own team, but also if this player on one side goes off, how does it affect the other one? So we'll talk about those and captains in just a second.
Think that quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards? How about that receiver in Miami grabbing a touchdown? Check out DraftKings Pick 6, the newest way to compete against others and play fantasy football to win cash with DraftKings. Pick a player and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like yards, touchdowns, catches, and more. Get your picks right and you'll win cash. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code BALLERS. That's code BALLERS for new customers to play $5 and get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed, plus 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Offer expires 9/19, only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. 1 per new customer. Reward issued as $50 in non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 6 months. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at NFL.com/terms.
So coming back to captains and how you pick those players, we don't really have to go too much of like explaining it's 1.5 times the salary, 1.5 times the price on DraftKings. And it's like, who's going to be the best player in this game? I try to not get too cute. I call it the Jason Moore method, where he loves taking the really, really cheap captain and fitting in all the studs. I found that doesn't really work in general because you have to find the cheap stud or the cheapie that catches a tight end or a touchdown and ends up with like 15 points. It just doesn't happen. So
the Jason Moore effect.
You know what I'm talking about. I've seen Jason. You've seen him build out lineups too for Showdown. And I'm like, I just don't know if this is going to work.
Yeah, and it's also very slate dependent, right? Like I'm trying to think of a good example for teams this year where like there will be viable options that far down the board, or maybe it's like injury based when we get into the season.
Broncos.
Yeah, but like now it's like, man, you have Lamar and Mahomes. Those guys could each easily go for 30 points and no one would be surprised. Kelce has passed to 890 and 2. Rashee Rice was a PPR monster a year ago. Derrick Henry, we just talked about, he can go for 102 scores. Pacheco was a workhorse down the stretch. Like the list goes on and on and on. So I would just be shocked if what you need is, Bateman captain or something like that. Now, just because I said that, Rashad Bateman will be the optimal captain because that's how this always works. But you get my point. Is like there's so much star power in this game that I would just be surprised if the cheap captain is the optimal way to go because those guys at the top just have insane ceilings.
I'm looking at the captain salaries right now. Last year, just for context, Patrick Mahomes' captain salary was over $18,000. This year, it's almost $3,000 cheaper. So you get a player that's number one in pass rate over expectation, a team that wants to throw the ball, and I think will be effective throwing the ball, it's really hard for me to get away from him. So it's Lamar, who is quite expensive considering he's a dog. And then you have Kelsey and Henry, Pacheco. Give me some of your early takes on rostering captains and who you kind of like here.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways you could go that I wouldn't fault anyone for, like I said, any of these guys at the top. My early lean is I really want to lean into a couple of specific guys. To me, Rashee Rice sticks out like a sore thumb where you can play him at captain for 11-4. It's just a really nice tag where you can then build out some of these mid-tier plays in the flex. Rice down the stretch last year was a guy that was actually seeing more volume than Travis Kelce. Yet at the same time, we think about Kelce and kind of where he's at this year in his career arc. The talk all offseason was like, well, maybe they save him a little bit for the playoffs. Now, I will still have, because I'm going to play a bunch of lineups, I'll still have my Captain Kelce exposure. But to me, Rashee Rice is probably one of my favorite plays on the slate, just given his PPR-friendly role, how much I think they're going to throw, and how, Marquise Brown is out. Xavier Worthy, we like him, and I'm excited about him. We'll talk about him. But at the same time, he is a rookie, and it's like now his main target competition is going to be filled with the Marquise Brown void of Justin Watson and Sky Moore and, these dead routes out there. Like, I think Rashee Rice is just so bankable for volume that I think given that situation, I really want to lean to Rashee Rice here. So I think Rice is my favorite price adjusted in this spot. And then obviously if I'm playing Rashee Rice at captain, I'd play Mahomes at flex.
Yeah, in general, rostering a captain or a wide receiver at captain is just a good strategy because of full PPR. You stack him with a quarterback. And there is just some positive leverage per Cody Main, which if you don't follow Cody Main of Established to Run, he's pretty much one of the GOATs when it comes to showdown stuff. But last season, 85% of the top 1% of lineups stacked a captain wide receiver, while only 77% did that. So there is some positive leverage there to be able to say like, hey, the field's not doing this as much as they should. They're only doing it 77% of the time, but 85% of the time, it was really, really good. So in general, it's just a good rule of thumb that if you are stacking right there, so you have Rice, Mahomes, I probably wouldn't add more than one other pass catcher from the Chiefs to that team. But it is very tempting. Like I'm looking at lineups like Worthy is 5,800. People want to play Jared Wiley or Noah Gray, who are super cheap tight ends who will probably have some run on the field and could catch a touchdown. Like all of those are viable. So if let's say you did play Rice, you have Mahomes, are you going to stop there at just one other pass catcher from the Chiefs?
So in general, what I like to do when I am playing a wide receiver at captain, again, you're telling yourself a story. And in this story, I'm saying, in this example, Rashee Rice leads the Chiefs in production. Maybe it's, 8 catches, 112 yards, a touchdown or something like that. And in that scenario, he is taking away production from his teammates. So I would basically set a rule if I was running an optimizer to max one other Chiefs pass catcher in the flex. So when I look at pricing, it's like, I would be surprised if Rice is the optimal captain and Kelce is in flex with Mahomes, just because it's so much of your salary allocated to those three guys that I'm probably more likely to go down the board to a value play like you said, Noah Gray, throw a dart, maybe Justin Watson catches a touchdown, throw a dart. Xavier Worthy's fine, but I think he's going to be so popular. So that's my way of playing captain wide receiver in general. I think for the Ravens, it applies even more so just because we expect Henry to run, we expect Lamar to run, that like if Zay is the captain that you need or Andrews is the captain you need, definitely max one other Baltimore pass catcher in the flex.
There's just so many good points per dollar plays on this slate just because of how people are priced down. So like, Rashee Rice is going to show up in so many different optimals.
Yeah. And
so for me, I'm kind of weighing him versus Kelce, and I don't want to just create like a binary decision of like, I want one or the other. But I agree with you. It's like really hard for me to fit in the salary when, there's other plays here. Mark Andrews is $6,400 and he's the wide receiver one. You and I love Mark Andrews. We're ready to be hurt by Mark Andrews again. He's off the injury report. It's just like there's so many other plays that I want to fit in. But I agree. My early take is just like, man, I'm going to be overweight Mahomes. And I know that everybody's going to want to play him, but relative to his salary, he should be, $2,000 or $3,000 more. So think about that savings there. And if you want to get different elsewhere, Any other just strategy points about captain stuff? I mean, like on this slate, I probably am going to keep my pool. I mean, I'm not going to play as many lineups as maybe you, but like my early take is I like Mahomes. I think Zay Flowers is a sneaky good play that I think people won't want to play him because he's 12,000 at captain and he's just way more expensive than Andrews. And I think a lot of people are just going to want to go down to Andrews. So I like Flowers as like a leverage play and Rice as well.
Yeah, I really like Flowers too. I mentioned just being higher on the passing attack from Baltimore than the public, just because, again, in the first half of games last year, this was a top 10 team in neutral dropback rate. So the Todd Monken thing happened. It just, like I said, in the second half, they were just dominant. Against the Chiefs, crazy things happen, so I guess they could, in theory, do that, but I would be surprised if they pull out, to a huge lead and get ahead of Mahomes and the Chiefs that way. So I think the game is probably going to go back and forth. And so we should see the pass rate stay pretty high for Lamar, or at least higher than the public thinks. The issue for Zay Flowers is that his splits last year with Andrews on and off the field were so different. And a lot of his stuff, especially early in the year, was just manufactured like dinky little screens and stuff like that. Now, down the stretch, he did develop a full route tree, and presumably entering year 2, we should leave our minds open to the idea of a second-year breakout. But at the same time, like you said, Andrews is going to play. My angle with Andrews, it's so tricky because I love him and I definitely want to play some of him. But I don't know how limited he might be. You mentioned he's off the injury report. The tricky thing is, again, these teams, like sometimes stepping back and having context around a situation matters. Like the Ravens clearly have Super Bowl aspirations, right? Mark Andrews hasn't practiced for basically 3 weeks in the middle of August and just got back late last week. So is there a world that exists where they limit his route tree, limit his snap numbers? I think it's possible. And if you're going to get paid off with a fraction of the roster percentage at captain for Zay Flowers when that scenario plays out, I want to lean into that. So, like, I love the Chiefs guys at captains, Kelsey and Rice and all those guys. But, like, for large field tournaments, Zay Flowers is probably my favorite way to play it.
All right, one more captain I just want to mention. Because this game does skew towards us liking the passing attack, how do you feel like people will respond to Isaiah Pacheco? Because adding Pirine this late does change people's sentiments. Like, it's just, everyone knows what Pirine's good at. He had 50 receptions last year. It's good in pass protection. It's like, this is an ancillary player that was just cut from the Broncos. Now he gets added to the Chiefs. I mean, that's, but like it affects us because of the timing. If Pirine was added 4 months ago, we would go, okay, well, we know he's the backup, but like Pacheco's the guy. Now it's like, oh, well, how much work is he going to get taken away? And so I think Pacheco might get squeezed a little bit because Rice and Kelsey just seem like much better plays. So he's expensive. We're not dealing with a running back that's super cheap by any means. At captain, he's over 12,000. But I feel like as a home favorite, it makes sense to want to lean into a running back here. I just feel like people aren't going to want to play him at captain as much.
Yeah, if you love to just get off the board and be like a GPP player and just say, this is what the field's going to do, so I'm going to do something a little bit different, that trio of Henry, Pacheco, Zay Flowers right there in pricing are going to get squeezed at captain because a lot of people are like, oh, I want to play Lamar, I want to play Mahomes, I want to play Kelsey. I'll skip that range. Give me Rice, give me Worthy for cheaper, give me Andrews. Those three guys are going to get squeezed. So, like, I mentioned Zay Flowers really like. I mentioned Henry in large field where you're contrarian and you say they win this game and he has 2 rushing touchdowns. I get that. But Pacheco, like you said, was a workhorse last year. Sure, they signed Pirine, but how much of the playbook does he know after, 10 days? How much has he used? Like, I think the field is going to be scared off a little bit. And they just talked all offseason glowingly about Pacheco and saying, they want him to be a 3-down back. They think he's ready for it. We have seen historically Andy Reid use true workhorses. So, like, if the field's going to shy away because of 10 days of Pirine news, like, I'm happy to play Pacheco, especially in tournaments, and, really get a massive leverage on the field that way. So, yeah, I think that trio is so interesting in tournaments. Henry, Pacheco, Zay Flowers.
Yeah, in the playoffs last year, they gave him 28 touches. I mean, that's just wild stuff. He's inefficient, 24 for 68 and 1 on the ground. That's a whopping 2.83 yards per carry, but who cares?
I think he also had a toe injury during that game, didn't he?
That's your field, man. I just know that it looked gross, and yet if you got that stat line, 28 opportunities, and let's see, over 80 yards and a touchdown, I think you'd be very, very happy if the Chiefs win at that price point compared to Derrick Henry. So I like Pacheco more as a contrarian play. One more point here before we just fully break down every angle of this game is in Showdown, we only have so many players to work with. We got Samaje Perine added, you said this morning.
Yep.
And the problem is because we have just a limited number of players, you're going to have lineups that are going to be duped. Now, I don't want you to go into building lineups and saying, I want to build a lineup that no one else has. And you just get so weird that you're building based on what you think everyone else is going to do rather than just building a good lineup that correlates. But we do want to avoid thinking about lineups in the same exact way and leaving salary on the table. So how do you plan on in this game getting a little different, getting a little unique, and being willing to leave some salary on the table?
Yeah, we talked about one way to get unique is just find a couple of those dart throws, especially in large field tournaments like the Justin Watson, Noah Grays of the world. Like, they're probably going to airball, but there are scenarios where they catch a touchdown pass and they're optimal, so you kind of want to have them in your pool if you're running a 150 set or a 20 max or something, especially for really, really large field lottos. But one way to just ensure you're definitely going to have a unique lineup is to leave salary on the table, like you talked about. There is a direct correlation with just, and it's, you know, the curve is slowly angles up and then massively up. If you kind of look at that on a duplicated basis based off your roster percentage or your salary rather, the closer you get to the 50K salary cap on DraftKings, the more likely you're going to be duplicated. So leaving 1,000 on the table, leaving 1,500 on the table, sometimes leaving even 2,000 on the table. It sounds scary because in our brains we just want to fit all the money that we can into the lineup and push enter. But that is one way to ensure you're going to get unique. And the reason we want to be unique is because, like you said, it's a limited player pool. And so when we have the optimal lineup, we want to vault to the top of the leaderboard, not hold hands with the field and just move up a couple of spots. So again, this is where like the game theory of Showdown comes in so much more than just player takes and football takes and all that stuff. But, you know, there is so much correlation with salary used and number of duplicated lineups.
Yeah, there's players on the Baltimore side that have weird, ambiguous roles. Like we talked about Bateman, we talked about Aguilar, Devontae Walker, Justice Hill is a player that normally I'd be like, sweet. But at 4,400, he isn't cheap. He's not just given to us the way that like Isaiah Likely is 2,600, and we love Isaiah Likely. So I wish Justice Hill was like $1,500 cheaper. Like he was closer to the 3K range because he saw half the team snaps inside the red zone last year at running back. So he has a weird role where I can see it pay off, but I still hate his price tag. But if this, they're trailing, then I think it's fine. But it's leaving salary on the table, being willing to go, you know what? If I'm at 48.5 or something, that's cool. I don't really care in this first game. So be willing to do that. And then we talk a lot of times, the field is going to build a 3x3 type of roster. They're going to have 3 Ravens, 3 Chiefs. I need a little bit of this, need a little bit of that. The spread says it's just a 3-point difference. And you and I say like, man, 4 2s and 5 1s are so fun. And sometimes you'll get it wrong. But in this instance, there's some cheap players where you can do that. And man, I really like the Chiefs defense. I think that they're underpriced relative. And same thing with Butker. Like he's cheaper than Tucker.
Yeah, and Justin Tucker is so interesting just because everyone knows Justin Tucker. He's like, largely considered the best kicker in the league, and
everyone hates Butker now.
That's also true. Everyone hates Butker. But generally, like a lot of times you'll see Justin Tucker just wildly rostered in Showdown because people know who he is. But if you're going to play a kicker, I prefer Butker. The Chiefs have a higher team total. They're favored. And then same thing, like you said, I think if you're running like a 150 set or a 20 max, like just have a couple lineups that are way off of what people think is going to happen. Everyone projects a back and forth affair. I already talked about, I like the over. I'm sure a ton of other people do, but what if this is one of those games where it's, 17-14 and the defense actually does pretty well considering their price for the Chiefs? Like, looking at where they're priced, they're way down there with like the Justin Watsons of the world. If Watson airballs, for example, or Justice Hill doesn't do anything and the Chiefs have 9 DraftKings points, Doesn't mean that they're incredible play in the actual game, but 9 DraftKings points from a defense might be optimal in flex, and no one's going to play them. The other thing with the Ravens, just to kind of have some context around this, nobody's really talking about it this offseason, but the Ravens' offensive line is kind of a concern. They're entering the year, they're bottom 10 team per PFF. So there's a lot of volatility there. And if I said that the pass rate should be there for the Ravens, we should see more Lamar dropbacks, which creates opportunity for turnovers, sacks, things like that. So yeah, I think the Chiefs defense, like you mentioned, large field tournament only play for me would be really contrarian way to play this. You say the game hits the under, maybe you correlate them with like a Pacheco captain and the Chiefs just dominate the game. Again, not likely, but weird stuff happens in Showdown.
It's funny how DFS lingo, like I'm with you the whole way through you said that, but I was just thinking about like, if my wife were to listen in and she'd go like, all right, what did he mean by this game hits the under with the Pacheco captain? Then you go underweight on, like, it's its own world. And it, to my wife, is just white noise. That's like, she can't hear any of it. Or like, remember last year in the divisional game, it was 17-10. The game hit the under. Kansas City had the ball for 37 minutes and Baltimore turned the ball over 3 times. Like, the thing about Lamar is he is super fun to play when he hits a ceiling, but there are some dud games and turnover games always lurking. So just keep that in mind. And Kelsey, remember, Kelsey went bonkers in the playoffs last year. He was 11 for 116-1 in that game. So they gave Pacheco a ton of work. Kelsey was like the main dude. There's so many different routes you can go in this game, but last year it was really gross in the playoffs. I mean, Mahomes still put up a ton, and Lamar actually beat him in terms of fantasy output, but he was worse in terms of the turnover department. So let's break down this game. I'm going to take a quick break, and then we're going deep dive. I'm going to like warm up our pipes and warm up so I'm going to use a drop that, we use every single week.
State of the main slate.
This is when we get to break down the games. And just for those OG listeners out there, every single time I hit that drop, Mike Glennon is right in my face. He's right there. Still part of the show.
Mikey G, what a guy. The GOAT.
All right, so this game has a 3-point spread. Kansas City favored. The over-under is at 46.5. It's gone to 47 in some spots. Think about this. Whenever the total is around this spot, I really think wide receivers have the most to offer us. So when we break down this game, we'll give our football takes, we'll give all those things. The wide receivers can separate from some of the other ones because we kind of know that these teams are built around these quarterbacks. So Mahomes and Lamar are going to be awesome plays. We're not going to tell anyone to not play them, especially in the flex spot. The issue is more captain and who can create separation from hitting the 100-yard bonus and, in full PPR, can they get 6+ catches or whatever? So when I was breaking down that game, so I went through and looked at that AFC Championship game. Baltimore, what they tried to do in the playoffs was double down by throwing to the slot. So I'm giving some football takes here, Betz. You call me out. But they were really successful all year, despite Andrews being hurt, that they were really good at throwing to the slot position. I mean, Lamar was best in football QB rating, targeting the slot. They tried to do it 45% of the time in the playoffs. So they said hey, this is where the targets are going. And Lamar was not great against targeting the slot last year. He had an interception. He didn't have any touchdowns against this team. And the way that Kansas City did it is that they did cover one, which is basically they had one single high safety. And what that does is limit Lamar from running the football. So Lamar was a better fantasy quarterback than Mahomes last year, and yet his pass catchers suffered outside of Zay Flowers. So when I look at this game and I look at the way the Kansas City defense plays, it does set up really well for the pass catchers, specifically Zay Flowers, to see enough targets. I mean, he was their best against man if you omit Odell Beckham, who is actually their best wide receiver against man coverage last year, which is hilarious. But he also saw 27% of the first read targets. So when I look at this game and I think of how it sets up, I think Zay Flowers, if he has a more diverse route tree, can be a slate breaker. Last year against Kansas City in the playoff game was 5 for 115 and 1. So you're going to get little dinky screens. So for DraftKings, that's great. But also, that he can have the yak plays or the deep plays to make things work. So I like Zay Flowers because I don't think people want to pay up for him. So I'm just looking at how Kansas City plays their defense. He's the person that stood out to me.
Yeah, and last year, KC was just dominant against perimeter wide receivers. A lot of that was the L'Jarius Sneed effect. We mentioned at the top of the show, he's gone. So, yeah, I mean, I'm in. Like, I think there's a really good chance that, like I said, there's outs where it works in so many ways, whether it's he just develops as a player this year and he takes that second year leap that a lot of guys do, talented prospect, first round pick, like all those things work for you. And the Chiefs defense regresses. And on top of that, I mentioned, I think there's maybe a chance, and I don't really know for sure. I'm going to try to do some digging throughout the week. Maybe there's a chance Mark Andrews' snap share is limited. Maybe his route share is limited coming off that car accident injury that he had a few weeks ago. If that's the case, we already talked about the splits. There's a direct correlation, at least last year there was, with on and off the field. So if Andrews is not 100% healthy, Zay Flowers has paths to being the wide receiver one, not only on his own team, but in this game. So yeah, I really like where he's priced just from a contrarian standpoint to go with that captain ceiling performance and, saying it runs through Zay, they have to throw more than we think, and Andrews is limited compared to what the public thinks. So yeah, I like Zay Flowers quite a bit.
Yeah, I think he just stands out because I think Rashee Rice is the best wide receiver to play at his price point, and it's really hard to look at him from a median outcome to say, like, I'm getting away from him. So I like Zay Flowers' leverage. Going to the quarterbacks, though, because that's kind of how we're building. Lamar's splits have been pretty drastic. On the road in his career, if they've won, almost 23 DraftKings points per game. In losses, 17. Now, if Lamar gave you 17 points and this game hits his total, I feel like you'd be a little disappointed at 11K. As a runner, in wins, he has 10 rush attempts, 64 yards a game. In losses, it's just 8.6 and 55 rushing yards per game. He has one total rushing touchdown in losses on the road in his career. So Lamar is volatile. And I think that's the point that, like, in my builds, I'm okay leaving Lamar out sometimes as a flex if I'm trying to get different, where normally I'd be like, it's the other quarterback, just move on. If this game hits the over, Lamar's optimal. But if this game just hits the total or hits the under, Lamar's one of those players that I'm okay getting away from.
Yes, you're talking about specifically if you're not going with Zay or Andrews at captain. If you are with those guys, definitely play Lamar and flex. But
yes,
Steve Spagnuolo's, I mean, anything can happen any year and any week, but like kind of has figured him out, at least so far in their careers, where Lamar's been a Raven and Spags has been the DC for the Chiefs. Like, credit to the Chiefs defense. They've played so well against Lamar. Not a lot of teams can say that. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to fade a guy just to fade him, but there is rationale for that. I like Lamar quite a bit, like I said, just because I think the pass attempts will be there in a negative game script, and opponents generally over the last couple of years have had to throw on KC at the 5th highest rate in the league over the last few seasons. So it's hard to see him, like, quote unquote failing, but the important point is that failing for a player is different where they're priced, meaning Lamar is the most expensive player on the slate. 15 DraftKings points is not going to be good enough, whether he's in flex or at captain, to be optimal most likely. So you're just asking yourself, where in that range does he fall, and making sure you're building lineups that correlate with where you think he is going to be in that spectrum.
Yeah, and it's more saying, if I like Zay, if I like Andrews and captain, he's my flex. And then if you're playing Mahomes and Mahomes goes off, you're saying Lamar probably comes back and helps them in some regard. Do you feel like Lamar and Henry is really hard to fit them in lineups together for pricing, but also just like Lamar's not a red zone runner the way that Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts is around the goal line, where Derrick Henry clearly has that role. In wins, he's averaging over 100 yards a game. So if this game's close or they do win, it's like, I have a hard time seeing both go off, but it's obviously possible. I just feel like those two are kind of against each other in my mind.
Yeah, and I would probably not play them together. Just there's going to be like a couple instances probably where they are optimal together, and in those situations, like, I'll just take the L and move on to the next slate. But most likely they're not correlated together, right? Think about like the Gus Edwards games last year.
Yes.
And I'm not making a comparison to their talent level, but like Gus Edwards, 31 carries inside the 10-yard line. That was 5th in the entire NFL. The Ravens have talked publicly about it. Harbaugh has talked about it. Like, they want to run when they get in close. So, like you mentioned, there's no Jalen Hurts tush-push scenario. Lamar doesn't really run a ton inside the 5-yard line. So, when they get in close, it's going to be Derrick Henry. And that's just football variance. It's hard to predict that. But like you said, if that is the case and Henry does have 2 touchdowns, it's probably unlikely that Lamar is also optimal. So that's one way that you can create massive leverage on the field, is saying, like, Captain Henry, it goes through him. He has the rushing scores. They pull off the upset. In that scenario, it's very unlikely, not just because of how they play on the field, but also their lineup with their salary. It's very unlikely those guys are in the same lineup together.
Yeah, I'm looking at those games where Gus Edwards, he had a little stretch between week 7 and week 11 where, he put up a ton of touchdowns. He was the running back 6, 1, 7, 3, and 28. So he had some killer performances. Lamar, in only one of those games, was like elite, put up over 30, and then some other duds, 12 points, 11.5 points, 13 points. So it's really hard for me to put both of those together. So yeah, I think Henry, just in general, it's easier for me to be underweight. If you want to build scripts where they win, they get out ahead, he's the guy you need, then that's fine. Just remember, this offensive line is a different unit. It's so easy to look at Derrick Henry and say, well, he's an upgrade. Let's move forward. He's better than Gus Bus. This is not the exact same offense. He's never run in this offense before. Keep that in mind. And this offense has never worked with 3 offensive linemen out the door. So I think that's my biggest thing when I'm given some more football takes, like the defensive line of the Chiefs versus the offensive line of the Ravens. They're going to have some push, and it is very different when you think of Derrick Henry being a yards after contact guy, but if you're met at the line of scrimmage and stuffed, it's very different. So Henry probably will be underweight in general, and if he beats me, he beats me. No one else you'd want to say that about than Derrick Henry, right?
Oh man, he's definitely going to go for like 120 and 2 just because he said that. But yeah, his splits in his career, right? Like in wins, this is half PPR, but in wins averages 18.7 fantasy points per game. In losses, 9.5. So you just need to call your shot and say the Ravens pull off the upset and it's because of Henry, or the Chiefs roll at home in week 1 because, well, that's what they always do. And in that scenario, Henry is unlikely to be optimal. The other thing with him too, home road splits, not as big over the course of of his career, but in the last like couple seasons, they have been more drastic. So again, those splits aren't everything. It's just a couple of data points.
So anything else on the Ravens side? We talked about Flowers, Lamar, talked about Derrick Henry. Let's talk about the tight ends, because we know that Baltimore has not been super heavy with 11 personnel stuff, and they were awesome last year with 2 tight ends on the field. And Lamar was number 1 in the league in quarterback rating when there was 2 tight ends on the field. My rational mind is put Isaiah Likely on the field. Like, put him on the field. We don't need to be running a bunch of stuff with Aguilar and Bateman, just running their wind sprints on the outside. So that's what I think they should do. And he was actually, Likely was their best wide receiver. When you look at that single high look, like he was the best in general in fantasy points per route run. And his price is so good. And I'm a sucker for Isaiah Likely. He's my highest rostered tight end in best ball. But I just know myself. I know what happens in these moments that, like, I fall in love with a player like this for Showdown, and I get burned because he goes 2 for 26.
Yep, that's possible. I think he's the best like pump play on the slate. When you're looking at, let's call it like the defense line, like 4K and below. I mean, it's the defenses, it's Aguilar, it's Watson, it's Pirine, who we don't even really know how much he actually plays, Devontae Walker, who might not even be active, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman, like Noah Gray. So any of those guys can airball, and no one would be surprised. Likely, like, I feel very confident he's giving you some production. Now, is it slate winning performance? Probably not. But like for cash games, if you are going to play cash on this slate, which I don't really play a ton, but if you are, I mean, Likely is the best salary saver in my opinion. And I mentioned with Zay Flowers, there's outs where maybe Andrews isn't 100% healthy and Likely plays more than we think. Let's also not forget, like, they spent pretty much all offseason hyping him up as if like they're going to run a ton of 2 tight end sets. They ran 11 personnel last year at the league's 5th lowest rate. So they kind of already did that. So is there a chance where he just plays more than we think? I think it's possible. And so to me, he's really interesting, whether it's part of like Lamar stacks or if you're just looking for a salary saver, to make the rest of your lineup work. I think likely is a pretty good play.
So with Andrews being 6,400, I mean, it's just like he's such a solid play, especially when you think about what he does in the red zone. Would you play both of those tight ends together?
I think you could, just because they both are so cheap. Like normally Andrews, like it's a different conversation when he's like 8,500 and likely is cheap, but at their price points, you're really not asking them to do that much. So I think it's possible, and I think it's actually a pretty unique angle on the slate where not a lot of people are going to want that, right? They're going to want one or the other. Now, I will say if I'm playing Andrews captain, I'm saying he has 95 yards and a score or something like that. Like he's the Ravens pass catcher you need. So I would probably not play likely in that lineup, but otherwise, I think it's a unique way to play it. If you are going to play, let's say, a Lamar captain team and double stack them with those guys and say Flowers fails and Bateman fails, it's viable, and I think it's actually kind of a unique way to play it in large field.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that you could play this out, because if you just think of likely as just a pure receiver, just throw out the tight end tag, we don't care, it's a flex spot, then at 2,600, he's half the price of Bateman, which Bateman is like the king of the air balls. I was looking at his lines, and we'll talk about this more because you and I are doing some pick six and some other stuff we're doing on Friday's show, but like it's so easy for me to take an under on a player like that because the receiving lines, he's like MVS. I will always take unders on MVS, and over the course of the season, that's going to hit 60+% of the time. Same thing with Justin Watson. He could hit it in one play, but a lot of times those plays don't happen. Justin Watson on the slate, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman, those are all players that could airball. Easily airball. And also, Justin Watson could catch a 40-yard bomb. So he's my favorite of those group of wide receivers. And then if I had to say of Baltimore, I'm not playing Devontae Walker. I just feel like that's just asking for airballs. I guess I'll factoring in salary. I guess I'll say Aguilar. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. The tricky thing is that I think two wide receiver sets, it's going to be Zay and Bateman locked in. When they go to 3, it's going to be Aguilar. I don't think Walker is playable on the slate. He hasn't really been with the first team at all in the preseason or in training camp. So I'm personally not going to play him at all, which means random 60-yard touchdown. Here you go.
Oh yeah, he's going for it.
And Aguilar, the vast majority of times you sim this slate, he's giving you 0. But there was random games last year where 50 yards and a score happened. So to me, like this group, Bateman, Aguilar, Devontae Walker, from putting an optimizer together, to me, it's a max 1. Like I would just be so surprised if, likely fails and Andrew fails and Zay Flowers fails and you need 2 of these guys, I'd be shocked. So to me, this is a max 1 situation.
Yeah, one of those guys, when they get in the red zone, could catch the touchdown. Where it's like Aguilar on, 5-yard whatever. Same thing on the Chiefs side. Like, would it shock you if Sky Moore had 1 catch for 3 yards and a touchdown?
Probably, actually. Same situation. It's the same conversation. I think Watson's probably going to play the most. This dude does not earn targets, right? So there might be just empty routes out there. But when Marquise Brown has been out in the preseason, and it has been Watson stepping up with the starters, along with Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice. So same situation. Watson, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman, these 3 to me are a max 1. And if they, I don't even know if Juju's going to be active, but if they add Juju to the player pool by the time the slate locks, again, he's in the same group. Max 1 of all these dudes: Watson, Sky Moore, Mecole, Juju.
So on the Chiefs side, Patrick Mahomes has killed it, you probably imagine, in week 1 in his career. He's average bets 3.3 passing touchdowns in week 1.
Andy Reid with time to prepare, man.
QB
every
4,
time.
5, 14, 2, 1, and 7. So
he good?
Yeah, I think Mahomes is the easiest one to be bullish on this entire game. How do you feel about Mahomes and Pacheco in the same lineups? Figuring out like how you're going to play those. Like if I'm rostering Rice or Kelsey at captain, I'm going to have Mahomes in there. I feel like Pacheco's going to be squeezed out of my lineups for pricing and for good reason and game flow. But let's say you have Pacheco as captain. Would you still think of Mahomes as a priority flex?
I think in the right scenarios, that makes sense. There's been some good research done over the course of the last couple of years where if the optimal 5-1 or 4-2 build is, a running back at captain and that team just runs away with it, let's say the Chiefs win by 3 scores. Again, we don't think it's going to happen, but wild stuff does. And they just dominate the ball. They control the clock. Lamar falls in his face. That is a scenario where like Pacheco captain, Chiefs defense, Mahomes, and like a pass catcher all get there because the play volume is so high on KC's side and the Ravens fail. That's where that works. Again, how likely is that? Probably not very. So most lineups that I have a Pacheco captain team, I will not play Mahomes with it. It's just, again, you tell yourself a story where the lineup correlates a certain way. Like if I go Pacheco captain, I'm telling myself probably that Lamar has to throw a bunch, and so let's stack him with at least one guy, maybe 2 in flex on the other side.
All right, so let's quickly talk about P. Ryan, because I haven't got to give much thoughts because as of last night, he wasn't in the pool. And now at 3K, I tend to look at information like this and go, when people get added, people want to play this person more, and I think they'll be rostered more than they should because there's not a lot of great cheap options. Like, do people want to pay 3K for Samaje Perine, who they know could have a PPR role, or Sky Moore, Justin Watson, or Aguilar? It's like people are going to be playing Perine. So, what's your take? Because my general stance is to just be underweight whatever people want to do.
I think that's the right way to play it when we just don't know, right? Like he was signed a week and a half ago. We have no idea how many snaps he plays. We know they want to throw. I mean, we know that they like him for that role as far as pass catching, but how much does he play in his first game? It's really hard to say in this spot. So if the field assumes he will play a lot and will catch a bunch out of the backfield, I'll just come in on the other side of it. At the same time, if we get to Thursday and we look at the optimizer and he's like, a 7% guy or something, like, okay, I see a world that exists where he catches 4 or 5 balls out of the backfield and Mahomes throws a bunch. Sure, then I'll go there in tournaments, but I don't think you can play him in cash. I think he's a pretty shaky small field play. But to me, it would be large field only.
All right, let's talk about Xavier Worthy, because the fact that Hollywood Brown being out helps us have even more confidence at his price point that he's going to be, I don't know, every down wide receiver is probably too much in a team that does have a committee in that it's his first game, but he has a strong enough role where he ran a route on 89% of Mahomes' preseason dropbacks, 25% target share. I mean, it's preseason numbers, but still, this player is great at his price point in an explosive offense, and we're buying into the passing game. So do you feel like Worthy is just like getting a bump in your mind? Like in the flex spot, like I like him a lot.
Yeah, I think historically Andy Reid with his rookie wide receivers has kind of played it slowly. We saw that a lot with Rashee Rice last year, but they don't really have a choice, right? I mean, Sky Moore, Hardman, Juju, like we kind of just know what those guys are at this point. Meanwhile, Worthy is playing with the first team a ton in the preseason. Again, his college profile, he's more than just a speed guy. Like he actually can play. I really like him a lot. So at that price, for a guy that's probably going to be on the field, maybe it's not 90% of dropbacks, but I'd be surprised if it's less than like 80. That's a super strong role and a super strong tag. So yeah, I think Worthy's awesome. He's one of those guys where I do think the cheaper guy at captain could work. Let's say he catches a long bomb or, plays more than we think or whatever. Like Worthy has passed to being the optimal lineup, whether it's a flex or captain. So just being high on the Chiefs passing game, I really like Xavier Worthy, especially at 5,800. It's just too cheap.
All right, let's just finish off with the tight ends, the Kansas City side, and then if you want to, Betz, let's build a lineup together just to get weird.
Let's do it.
A GPP lineup. So Kelsey's at 9,600. Noah Gray is 1,600. I feel like people want to play Jared Wiley, and yet $200 is tempting, and yet I don't know how much he's going to get on the field. You're basically begging him to get a goal line, red zone type touchdown, and he did see some of those looks in preseason. I feel like it's not the craziest thing, but in general, I will probably let other people go there. He's just not a player. So, any interest in playing 2 Kansas City tight ends?
Probably not. It's hard to see Gray and Wiley being in there together, and then when you play them with Kelsey, you're basically saying Kelsey's like fine at his price, but isn't actually like great. And at that price, it's unlikely. So yeah, to me, it's max one of all 3 of these guys. And obviously with Gray and Wiley, like an air ball is very, very likely. Noah Gray last year was about a 38% route rate, which is decent for a backup tight end, but saw a 6% target share on the season. So most weeks he's seeing like 1 target. Does he catch a touchdown or not is the question.
All right, let's build a GPP lineup. Oh, by the way, I think we usually give our Vegas takes here, and we will on Friday's show, but I will take KC in the points.
I will as well, which means guaranteed Baltimore covers.
And you lean the over as well?
I lean the over, yeah.
Okay, so let's build a lineup here. I will defer to you being the person that gets to be the captain of the ship, and then I will offer some suggestions. So this is a tournament. If you are putting this in, which we do have a tournament right now, we will add some more in our Fantasy Footballers DFS Borg and Betz League on DraftKings, but start us off at captain and we'll run from there.
Okay, I mentioned at the top of the show, you asked who's your favorite play on the slate. I think he's going to be popular, so we got to get different elsewhere, but let's go with Rashee Rice at captain.
Imagine you taking Rashee Rice, who was your fantasy MVP on the show last week. Apparently, I didn't take a fantasy MVP. I took a team.
Go Eagles.
I see those guys are turds. We know that for sure. On the main show, we had a fantasy MVP show on Friday, and I felt like mine's actually a harder take to swallow, that all of them pay off and that all of them exceed their ADP. But they didn't hear that part.
No, they sure didn't.
Okay. I just hope Devonta Smith is great. All right, so we have Rashee Rice at captain. That is 11-4. I'm assuming we have Patrick Mahomes as one of our flex spots.
Yes.
Okay. From there, I'm trying to figure out which player at wide receiver, or who's my third pass catcher that I probably want to add in, or my third Chiefs piece. So were these interesting? You could put Pacheco, but what game flow are you going for here, bro?
The Chiefs throw a ton, and they get out to a lead.
Okay, that's kind of interesting with Pacheco here.
We can throw Pacheco in. He actually correlated pretty well last year with Rashee Rice, so I like it.
Okay, so what if we did, so we have Rice at captain, Mahomes is a flex, Pacheco is a flex. We're probably going to want either Flowers or Lamar Jackson. So let's say we throw in Jackson as just like the bring back.
Oh, that's tough. Because then it leaves us 8,400 total for the last two. So we're going down to the dust ball range for two players in that range.
What if you had a way too cheap Mark Andrews?
Okay, let's see what that does. That leaves us 2K left.
Okay. Is there a 2K player or a player that leaves some salary on the table that we feel comfortable with?
There sure is not.
What about...
There absolutely is not.
Noah Gray.
I mean, it works, right? Because we're saying Rice goes bonkers, which means Kelsey probably fails. You know, they get off to a lead. They get Pacheco in there in the second half. The Ravens have to throw, and it goes to Lamar. That tells a story to me. And if Noah Gray catches one of Pat Mahomes' 3 touchdowns, then we're cooking with gas.
Do you feel like this lineup is contrarian enough for a large field?
No.
Okay. That was my first reaction. I feel like this logically makes sense, and therefore I would be open to putting this in a more small field tournament. But I feel like I'd want to get different and leave more salary. So, not have Lamar and drop down somewhere and maybe get up somewhere from Gray in a tournament. Does that make sense?
Exactly. And I think one way that you could do this, to just talk about like large field, like just get weird and kind of do whatever feels uncomfortable, is like in that scenario, we have so many Chiefs. What if we just throw the Chiefs defense in there and Lamar fails, we take Lamar out and they just have to throw a ton, and we just have PPR volume with Zay and Mark Andrews and leave $1,800 on the table?
That's beautiful. Large field, small field. We already have a winning lineup. It's good stuff on this podcast, my friend.
If we just keep going and just put like 150 of these together and we just record all of them, us talking, we'll be able to say we put the winning lineup on the show. So should we just go for 3 hours?
Yeah, we haven't named every single player. We haven't talked about Rasheen Ali yet. One of my boys.
Yeah, Dynasty boy.
I probably will not be playing. He will not be in my lineups for week 1. He might not even be playing in this game. But
correct.
If you want to play with us, go to ballersdfs.com. You can be a part of our DraftKings League, Fantasy Footballers DFS Borg and Betz. We will have contests for you, and we will add more throughout the week. Betz, week 1 is almost here. Sign us off.
Yes, sir. Thursday Night Football should be awesome. If you need any more of the content around Showdown for this slate, my article is up in the DFS Pass, and we're back on Friday to preview the Sunday main slate. Football is back, baby. Somebody out there win $1 million. Let's go.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at thefantasyfootballers.com.